So I'd like to welcome all of you to the fourth installment of the Wedgwood International Seminar's lecture series. Thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to another large audience today, as we have had in our previous lectures. And I would like to remind you that this lecture will be recorded and it will join the other lectures that we have done. And they're all on our WIS YouTube channel. And the easiest way to access all of the lectures is to simply go to YouTube and then type in Wedgwood International Seminar. And I think you'll enjoy all of them, either for the second time or perhaps for the first. During 2021, the 65th year since WIS was founded, it has been our pleasure to bring these lectures to you free of charge. Why not consider joining WIS? Because in addition to these wonderful high-level Zoom lectures, there are other benefits, including our annual 4-day in-person seminar, the scholarly proceedings, which is edited by Dr. Anne Forschler-Tarish, and of course, and maybe almost importantly, the Fellowship of Ceramic Enthusiasts from around the world. It's really easy to access the WIS membership form, and all you need to do is go to our website and you will find the link for that membership form. And of course, the website is wedgwoodinternationalseminar.org. So just a few quick words on how the meeting will be conducted. Dr. Anne Forschler-Tarish will be today's moderator. She will introduce our speaker. The lecture will be followed by a question and answer session. And please remember, while you're listening to the lecture, to please put any questions you may have into the chat box, which of course, as you all know, is at the bottom of your screen. After the Q&A session, I would like you to still hang in, stick with us, and I would like to take a minute or two to tell you about our next Zoom lecture. So right now, let me please present Anne Forschler-Tarish.
Thanks, Lorraine. I'm very excited to introduce Rebecca Klarner. I've known Rebecca for several years. She's originally from Germany and began her association with the Wedgwood Museum about 2010 when she completed an internship there. She went on to do her master's degree in the UK and continued to volunteer at the Wedgwood Museum. Her master's thesis focused on German copies and some French copies of Wedgwood productions in the late 18th and early 19th century. She went on then to become the Collections and Curatorial Services Officer at the Wedgwood Museum, now the V&A Collection at the World of Wedgwood, beginning in 2015, and she served in that role then for the past 6 years or so. She's currently doing research on Wedgwood's influence on the shaping of good design in the 20th century, which is a very exciting topic. I'm looking forward to hearing more. And today she's going to talk to us about the Lessore family of artists working for Wedgwood in the 19th century. So please welcome Rebecca Klarner.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anne. Okay, I'm just going to get this started. There we go. There we go. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to the 2021 Wedgwood International Seminar online lecture series. It's a pleasure to speak to you all today. While the lecture title is focusing on one person in particular, Elaine Thérèse Lessore, better known just as Thérèse, her story really cannot be told without telling the story of those that surround her. It is a story over 3, if not actually 4 generations, and around at least as many corners. But what will be revealed is a network of ingenuity and creativity that seamlessly moves across the worlds of the fine and decorative arts. And it is only fitting that we will be seeing many works of art in many different types of media, and especially the ceramic pieces might in some cases be quite familiar to you. We shall begin where the name Lessore encounters the name of Wedgwood for the very first time, with Elaine Thérèse, for reasons of brevity, we shall call her Thérèse from now on, grandfather Emil, whom you see at the very top here. From there, our story shall be following mainly the female lines of the Lessore family. Emil Oberli, born south of Paris in Malotte in 1805, was a French painter and ceramic artist. He first studied under Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, which led him to exhibit at the Paris Salon, where he won his first medal in 1831. About 2 decades later, he began to work on ceramics at the Sèvres porcelain factory until 1852. He left the Sèvres factory, allegedly due to other painters' jealousy, and moved to England. His first, albeit very brief, employment was with Minton's, from where he swiftly moved on to the Wedgwood factory in 1860. There he was employed from 1860 to 1874, and he gained a great reputation. For a visitor of our museum, this is probably the most memorable of his works. It is one of a pair of vases depicting scenes from the triumphs of Alexander by Charles Le Brun. And its counterpart is at home in Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm grateful to Unfortunate for sending me the photograph. It's lovely to see them together. Emil Lessore's work, which was often signed, was exhibited by the firm at the London International Exhibition of 1862, the Paris Exposition Universelle of 1867, and the Vienna Exposition of 1873. Despite all success, Lessore struggled with the English climate, and only 2 years after he began his employment with Wedgwood, he moved back to Malotte. He negotiated a new agreement with the firm, which allowed him to live and work in France, but he had to spend 10 days of each summer month at Etruria. Probably something that in times of COVID is quite familiar to a lot of us working from home. At Wedgwood, he painted, consulted on designs, recommended modelers and engravers, advised on matters of taste and fashion, and created designs for tablewares. Emil's children were Thérèse, not Elaine Thérèse, and Jules Frederick. Jules became a painter himself, and he lived in England from 1871. He's well known for his maritime scenes and townscapes. Many of his paintings are now in public collections. His sister Thérèse, as a child, is said to have slipped painted china pieces into the same casket as her father's work. As an adult, she worked for Wedgwood in the 1870s. Jules and his wife Ada Louise, née Cooper, lived in Southwark, near West Sussex, and had 3 children. The eldest was Frederick, born in 1879, then followed by Ada Louise in 1882 and Elaine Thérèse in 1884. Frederick Lessore did not become a painter, but a portrait sculptor. He had studied at the Royal Academy schools and was also a member of the Art Workers Guild. Most of these images, by the way, are from a collection of photographs at the V&A. The actual sculptures are not at the V&A. In 1914, he traveled to Canada for 9 months, exhibiting his sculpture in the principal towns. He was commissioned by the Canadian Pacific Railway to execute a colossal bronze statue of Lord Mount Stephen, which you see on the right, which was erected in the new terminal station at Montreal as memorial to their first president. The exhibitions were said to have been visited by, I quote, a very large number of people and called forth many expressions of appreciation. His, I quote, more than usual ability and power were being praised, as were, I quote, his quite unusual powers of characterization and his remarkable rendering of textures. During his time in Canada, he appears to have used the opportunity to model members of Canadian Indigenous peoples, as these two sadly not further named busts in the middle and on the left show. In 1923, he opened the Bazaar Gallery in London, which he later ran in partnership with his wife Helen, née Brooke, a painter and also a writer. Originally, the larger of the gallery spaces at the Bazaar Gallery had been his studio. Thérèse Lessore would be exhibiting her work at a brother's gallery in 1936. Frederick and his wife Helen had two sons. The younger one is John Lessore, who's still active as a painter today and is known as, I quote, one of the leading figurative painters of his generation. It is also worth dedicating time to Frederick's wife Helen. Even though not a Lessore by blood, she still deserves more attention as an artist in her own right than just to be mentioned as the wife of. Helen Brooke was born in London in 1907 as the daughter of Jewish parents with Lithuanian, British, German, and Spanish heritage. She entered the Slade School of Fine Art in 1924, where she won further awards and commendations after already having been successful at art competitions while still at school. Her affiliation with the Bazaar Gallery, and indeed with Frederick Lessore, began when she was employed as gallery secretary in 1931. Only a year later, she published her first article on Walter Richard Sickert, who would become one of the principal artists of the gallery, and not to forget Thérèse Lessore's, Helen's sister-in-law's, second husband. We will hear more about him later. You see Helen here in a photograph from 1959 in front of Walter Sickert's self-portrait, Servant of Abraham. The preliminary photography, which you see above, had been taken by Thérèse. In one of the obituaries for Helen, it says, I quote, "From Sickert, Helen Lessore learned to prefer the vitality of swift and direct drawing from observation over the painstaking precision Henry Tonks, one of her teachers at the Slade, had urged in preparation for painting. In 1934, she married Frederick, who was almost 30 years her senior. Due to parenthood and the outbreak of the Second World War, she almost completely ceased her own artistic production. This situation did not improve when she took over the directorship of the gallery after Frederick's death in 1951. Only after she closed the gallery in 1965 and moved to a very generous and inspiring property in Camberwell, she resumed her artistic work. The gallery's final exhibition was of Helen and Frederick's son, John, whose first art teacher she was, before he went on to study at the Slade, just like she had done. The gallery under Helen's directorship has been described by the journalist Philip Oakes as, I quote, one of the most individual and influential nurseries of talent in the country. Helen Lessore made the gallery a major venue for contemporary realist painting. In the early 1950s, she gave solo exhibitions to 4 young realist painters who would become known as the Bazaar Quartet, painters John Bradby, Derek Greaves, Edward Middleditch, and Jack Smith. In 1956, they were selected to represent Britain at the Venice Biennial together with 2 other artists. Helen Lessore's achievement as a painter was recognized by the 1958 birthday honors, where she was made an OBE, Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, for her services to the arts. A retrospective at the Fine Arts Society in 1987, the same year that she had been elected a Senior Royal Academician, honored her life's work. Frederick's sister Ada Louise, known as Louise, is probably better known under her married name, Louise Powell. She married Alfred Hoare Powell in 1906, and until then, we shall refer to her and her work with her own name. You see them here all together, Elaine Thérèse, Ada Louise Sr., Alfred Powell, and Ada Louise Jr. Louise, in intimate circles referred to as Lala, was said to be small and shy and quietly spoken, yet notably impressive by her strength of will and charm. She had been taught in calligraphy by Edward Johnston at the Central School of Arts and Crafts, which was run by the arts and crafts theorist William Richard Leatherby. She became a member of the Society of Scribes and Illuminators and also worked with Johnston's successor, Grayley Hewitt, on several major commissions, including 2 incomplete William Morris manuscripts. This is calligraphy on parchment from 1905 at the National Art Library, called Gloria in Altissimis Deo. The text from the Gospel according to St. Luke, chapter 2, verse 14, is handwritten in gold on illuminated floral ground. This was exhibited at the Arts and Crafts exhibition at the Grafton Galleries in London in 1906. At the same time, she produced decorative schemes for furniture and became an established craft worker and designer. And you will see some of these cuts from magazines and papers at the time. I hope you can read the, here, Louise Powell, I hope you can read that. Alfred Hall Powell was a trained architect and had worked in the office of John Dandos Sedding, who believed that an architect should be equally concerned with the ornament of a building as with its structure, a notion that shall become more important as we progress through Alfred's work. In Sedding's office, Powell also met Ernest Gimson, the Barnsley brothers Sidney and Ernest, and William Richard Leatherby. When Louise married Alfred Powell, who was nearly 20 years her senior, in 1906, he had already established an association with the Wedgwood factory. His brother Oswald had been at Cambridge with Frank Wedgwood, who was a partner in the family firm, and a lifelong friendship was to grow between Frank and the Powells. In 1903, Alfred had submitted designs to the factory, and their progressiveness connected to the principles of the arts and crafts movement was realized by the firm. Louise's family's relationship to the company strengthened this bond. The arts and crafts movement began to gain momentum towards the end of the 19th century. It rejected the industrialization, believing that it led to degradation of work, the working class, and the environment. In turn, the return to the medieval system of workshops was advocated. It appears contradictory that Alfred Powell would choose to work for one of the largest ceramic factories at the time, which was also certainly one that had already perfected the division of labor over 100 years ago. However, as we shall see, he and Louise achieved the impressive task to re-establish hand painting beyond the enameling of printed patterns in the Wedgwood factory. After their marriage in 1906, Louise also began to decorate ceramics, even though she had already entered designs for ceramic shapes into competitions as early as 1900, as you can see here. So just to give you an idea where we are, this is Bloomsbury in London. Euston Station would be up here somewhere. Early in 1907, Louise and Alfred opened a studio for their artwares in Bloomsbury at 20 Red Lion Square, partly financed by Wedgwood and now presumably Red Lion Street after World War II bombing. And the first exhibition followed at this address only in May of the same year. Regular exhibitions of the latest wares followed at the Bloomsbury studio, as well as other addresses and galleries. The studio was to become an important hub for artists wanting to expand their work onto ceramics. Many of the designers frequenting the address were students or teachers at the Central School of Arts and Crafts, and for some time, Alfred Powell even taught China painting at this school. Together, Louise and Alfred frequently visited the Etruria factory, where their wares would be glazed and fired, and shapes would be specially thrown for them after their designs. Sometimes these shapes can be identified by an incised P on the base, followed by the shape number. And you can see two lists here of some of the shapes. Stock blanks, i.e. glazed but undecorated wares, would also be chosen by them while they were at the factory. On the occasion of one of those visits, Louise must have encountered the pattern books of the time of Josiah Wedgwood I. Maureen Batkin tells the story as follows, I quote, "At that time, some of these patterns were still in production, but they were usually printed and hand-colored. This rather mechanical print and tint process struck the Powells as a particularly dull occupation, and so they suggested to Frank Wedgwood that, as an experiment, some of the girls should be trained to paint the entire pattern freehand. This suggestion was accepted by Wedgwood. This revival of hand painting, provoked by the Powells, paved the way for the establishment of the handcraft department at Etruria during the 1920s. The majority of the designs were provided by the Powells, and one of their pupils, Millicent Taplin, was to head the department. John Goodwin, the then art director, was happy to leave the field of art wares and hand-painted patterns to the Powells and their decorating department. Goodwin's main priority was to improve the commercial, mass-produced ranges, for which he translated Powell designs into less complex and less labor-intensive versions that could be produced by the factory in quantities such as the Powell-designed tablewares. Though their work is often mentioned in the same breath, there is a certain distinction in style between the work of Louise and Alfred, and thankfully, both of them employed an individual monogram as well. Louise's training in calligraphy is evident in her bravura of the brush. Calculated and economical through its skillfulness, Louise's hand covers the surface in intricate, organically repeated patterns of stylized leaves, flowers, and berries, with the graceful elegance of a true scribe. Alfred's designs, on the other hand, are often more formal and disciplined. His architectural past in Settings Office shines through not only on pieces depicting landscapes with architecture, but also in designs that follow and emphasize the lines of a vessel, like the ornamentation of a building. The whole pattern being truly inspired by the inherent quality and aesthetic of its lines, shape, and volume. Remember how John Sedding had said that an architect should be equally concerned with the ornament of a building as with its structure? I feel this is just as true for Alfred Powell's ceramic designs. The Powells had established a close relationship with the Wedgwood family, which to a large extent broke away after the death of their champion and friend Frank Wedgwood in 1930. Their engagement with the firm continued, although much fewer designs were produced. One important commission of this later period was the design of a commemorative vase marking the 1930 bicentenary, which was designed by Louise for a limited edition of 50. Both Powells continued to work into the 1940s. Louise died in 1956, outliving her younger sister Thérèse, whose legacy she secured by accommodating important works with major museum collections, an example of which we will see in just a minute. Alfred died in 1960, only a few years shy of his 100th birthday. We're now finally coming to the main character of this talk, and I must apologize for putting you through such a long suspense. But only when I started to look deeper into the Lessore family, I realized how tightly interwoven it was, and how talent not only seems to have been passed on through the generations, but was also inseparably connected with a wider network of artistic creativity. Not all that much is known about Thérèse Lessore's life, and as it happens all too frequently in history, she's often only mentioned as Walter Sickert's wife, who just so happened to be a painter herself and naturally was greatly influenced by her husband's artistic style. I'm being sarcastic, of course. As we will see, and as many of you already know, Thérèse Lessore is due way more credit than just being the wife of. But one must not forget that there were also many critics who pointed out exactly the opposite, her independence from her husband's artistic influence. In 1931, the Yorkshire Post writes, quote, "At Mr. Wilson's gallery is now being held an attractive exhibition of the works of Thérèse Lessore. This artist is the wife of Mr. Richard Sickert, probably the foremost English painter of today. It is a real tribute to her artistic independence to write that despite her husband's influence, which has widely affected many contemporary English artists, Mrs. Sickert never loses her own personality. Superficially, there is a resemblance, no doubt, but this is much more in the subject than in the method of treatment. The latter is essentially French and essentially feminine. It is light and delicate, has a grace of its own, and displays at times very considerable powers of execution. And in 1936, the Observer writes, I quote, "But apart from her titles for paintings and a certain looseness of touch, Thérèse Lessore avoids too obvious a marital domination. Her color is all her own and is sufficiently personal as she uses a curious flood of cold light enhanced by warm shadows. This is most successful in a series of hot-picking pictures." Walter Sickert himself said about her that, I quote, "She was the only woman that he had ever met who took no notice of what he said and did exactly what she pleased." Thérèse, who was also known as Lainey, derived from her first name Elaine, was the youngest of 3 siblings. She was born in 1884, 2 years younger than her sister Louise. Like all of her siblings, she was born in Southwark, near Brighton. Her artistic training began at the Southwestern Polytechnic Art School, which is nowadays known as the Chelsea College of Art and is part of the London Institute. In 1904, she entered the Slade School of Fine Art, where she would be trained in drawing and painting for 5 years. And this beautiful piece here, you see, was given by Louise Powell to the V&A. This silk panel is from 1906, after one of her designs, and here it is illustrated after being exhibited in Brighton. There's certain evidence that suggests that Thérèse's mother, Ada Louise, was involved with the actual embroidery of pieces like this. Further research is needed here. Thérèse won the Melville Nettleship Prize for figure composition in 1909, the same year that she married her first husband, the painter Bernard Adnet. Her first public exhibition was in 1912 with the Allied Artists Association, a group modeled on the Parisian Salon des Indépendants, thus being completely independent from established societies such as the Royal Academy. Fee-paying members could exhibit up to 3 works of art at the association's annual exhibition at the Royal Albert Hall, and it became an important showcase for British and foreign artists, introducing the public to a wide range of styles. In 1913, Thérèse was a founder member of the London group, and she displayed her work at the group's exhibitions too. Her first solo exhibition, which comprised of 55 paintings and drawings, was displayed at the Eldar Gallery in 1918. Walter Sickert wrote the preface to the catalogue. I quote, "There's drawing, not the street or the woman, but the impulse of a bargain in a crowd, the connection of a hearth which is, or is not, a home, the progression in suburban lanes of an elderly gentleman, unintoned baby, or a reflective temperament, the fatigue and impatience of a man who has to wait for his change, leaning on his bicycle." Thérèse's painting often shows circus scenes and music halls, but also landscapes and interiors. Depicting men and women picking hop in the fields of Kent became a very important subject for her. A subject that she may be said to have discovered, said the Bath Weekly Chronicle in 1945. Her palette and brushwork create an atmosphere that is almost meditatively quiet, and the viewer becomes an observer of everyday life through her lens. Even though they are often snapshots of crowds, her paintings are intimate, with a photographic immediacy. Often her scenes share the life and world of women, be it at the fair, in the fields, looking after children while working, or in domestic scenes. As you already may have noticed, even prior to their marriage in 1926, Sickert and Thérèse moved within the same artistic circles, and from early on he was very fond of her work. Writing about her in 1916, so 10 years before they got married, Sickert said, I quote, "Miss Lessore has the gift of stimulating perpetual curiosity and of leaving it unsatisfied. I'm always wishing that she would tell us a little more here and there. Perhaps if she did, the spell would be broken." Sickert had divorced his first wife, Ellen Cobden, in 1899 after 4 years of marriage. His second wife, Christina Angus, died in 1920, 9 years after they got married. When Sickert returned to London from France in 1922, after Christina's death, he moved into a studio at 15 Fitzroy Street, which is up here, which was a stone's throw from Thérèse's studio in number 20. She was recently estranged and soon to be divorced from her husband, and a mutual love of the theatre and music halls made her and Sickert grow closer. They discussed their work and art in general, and in June 1926, they got married at the registry office in Margate. At the age of now 66, he was 25 years her senior. Their marriage was announced in several newspapers, the Dundee Courier describing her as, I quote, "herself a distinguished artist who shares her husband's enthusiasm for painting music hall audiences and people enjoying themselves, or being bored, at fairs. She also paints little pictures on plates in the old-fashioned pink luster. The plates are fired and used as dessert services." Just like these. As Thérèse also did not live far from her sister Louise, now Powell, who lives in 20 Red Line Square, not far from her sister Louise, now Powell, who had established her studio for art wares together with her husband Alfred in 1907 in 20 Red Line Square, this became her source for Wedgwood blanks. Different to the practice of her sister and her brother-in-law, Thérèse truly used the blanks as an extension to her canvas. Like snapshots of the everyday life, these painted scenes transform domestic vessels into windows to intimate moments of observation. When her brush picks up the shape of the piece, such as in the case of a border to be painted, it is merely just that, a border, decorative and to emphasize and frame the main scene, just like her paintings would be framed when hung on a wall. Neither her sister nor her brother-in-law ventured into the field of figurative painting on their ceramic creations. Thérèse, however, takes the change of medium with lightness. Often she uses lusters, like the Powells did too, possibly as they have a low firing temperature and therefore could be fired in a small non-industrial kiln, just like the one of Mr. James in London, where the Powells were instructed by Wedgwood to fire part of their wares. Earlier work still employed a polychromatic palette, whereas her later work tends to be monochromatic and stylistically very similar to her etchings. Not having to change her brush when she was using just one color enabled her to produce immediate and almost sketch-like creations that capture the essence of a bright summer's day by the seaside or the tender shyness of what appears to be a first date. Thérèse often displays her ceramic work alongside her paintings and would continue to work on Wedgwood blanks into the 1930s, producing what Sickert used to call lovely and valuable bibelots. In 1938, Thérèse and Sickert moved to Bathampton, a little village on the outskirts of Bath, where Thérèse continued to paint, although much of her time was now devoted to assisting an aging Sickert with the preparation of his canvases, etc. Sickert died in Bathampton in January 1942, and Thérèse appears to have moved back to London to be near her sister and her sister's husband. Thérèse died in London 3 years later, so in 1945. I also briefly wanted to show you this wonderful tea set, as it is, as far as I am aware, not published in the literature. It resides at Busket Park, the family home of Lord Farringdon in Oxfordshire. This talk about progressive artists using Wedgwood blanks as an extension of their artistic expression would be incomplete without mentioning the so-called famous women dinner service. It was designed and executed by Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant, two main actors of the so-called Bloomsbury Group, as a commission for Lord Kenneth Clark. Many a story is to be told about the Bloomsbury Group, its members, and their tangled relationships. For the purpose of this paper, all we need to know is that the Bloomsbury Group was a group of like-minded, often privileged and free-thinking intellectuals and individuals who were united by their belief in the pursuit of art and pleasure. Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant, the creators of the famous women dinner service, when not in London, lived at Charleston, their home in the Sussex countryside. This was also where the service was painted. A recent publication called From Omega to Charleston, The Art of Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant, that presents new research on, amongst other things, the dinner service, was most valuable for this paper. The following information regarding the dinner service stems from said publication, as surprisingly, but sadly, our archives appear to not have any other treasures to contribute. And I'm grateful to my colleague Lucy for double and triple checking for me. Kenneth Clark was an influential art historian, museum director at the Ashmolean and at the National Gallery, and a patron. In 1931, he and his wife Jane commissioned 33 large plates, 12 smaller plates, 36 side plates, 12 soup cups and saucers, 1 salad bowl and stand, 2 junket dishes, 6 oval dishes at different sizes, 2 sauce boats and stands, 4 pepper pots, 4 salt pots, 4 mustard pots, 2 sauce tureens and stands and handles, and 3 Liverpool jugs. What they received could not have been any more different from the luxurious fine dining ware that at least Mr. Clark seems to have expected. Jane Clark, however, was in constant written conversation with Vanessa Bell, and definitely, to a very large extent, was informed of the nature of the decoration Bell and Grant had chosen. The service that the Clarks received comprised of 50 dinner plates, depicting 12 writers, 12 dancers and actresses, 12 queens, 12 beauties, all of them female, and 2 plates featuring the artists themselves, all painted on Wedgwood earthenware blanks. Previously, it had been assumed that Thérèse Lessore was the link that enabled Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant to utilize Wedgwood blanks for this commission. But more recent research in the mentioned publication has shown that it was in fact William "Billy" Winkworth, a ceramics collector, connoisseur, especially of Chinese porcelain, and important staff member at the British Museum, which acquired many pieces from him, as well as being a mutual friend to the Clarks and the 2 artists, and he made the introductions to Wedgwood. What I did find in our archives, though, is an entry in one of Norman Wilson's experiment books regarding a WWW leadless glaze, dated 9th of March, 1931. The 3 W's famously were also Billy Winkworth's often used initials. This, by the way, is not Norman Wilson's handwriting. This down here is his hand. Given also the fact that the recipe is so precisely dated and would match the time of commission of the famous women dinner service, it is possible that this glaze recipe is linked to it. However, more evidence is needed to draw a convincing conclusion. At Wedgwood's London showroom in Hatton Gardens, Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant were shown the various services available, but disliked the modern styles. They traveled to the Truro factory, where they were shown all the different shapes, glazes and colors, and decided for the so-called concave shape, I quote, "a plain round white plate with a slightly concave edge, which would be so much the best for painting on. These quotes are from a letter by Vanessa Bell to Jane Clark. You see the concave shape here in one of Wedgwood's early shape books. The Clarks received the finished service about 2 years after the original commission. Innumerable studies, such as this one now at the V&A, had been created by the artists, and trials had been sent back and forth with the Etruria factory. After having been sold at auction at some point in their later life, the plates had all but disappeared from the surface of the earth and only re-emerged in 2017. After sponsoring through several organizations and a public fundraiser, the plates are now back at Charleston in Firle, East Sussex. The long-standing connection between artists from the Lessore family and the Wedgwood Company ended with Elaine Thérèse Lessore in the middle of the 20th century, almost 200 years after her grandfather, Emil Oberli, had laid the foundation. Time and time again, these artists have shown how Wedgwood ceramics provide the perfect canvas to create an intersection between the fine and decorative arts. And before I close, I would like to make an announcement which I think might be of interest to many a Wedgwood collector. We have been successful in an application for AHRC funding for a collaborative doctoral partnership between the V&A and the University of Leeds on the question of good design, Wedgwood's role in the shaping of public taste in the 20th century. This is a project I have been working on for the past 2 years, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be given the opportunity to work on this project part-time as the nominated PhD student while continuing to work at the V&A Wedgwood collection at Barlaston. I'm sure this is not the last time you will hear of this project, and I know that you're exactly the right audience when it comes to hidden treasures tucked away. So consider me and my project next time you have a closer look at your wonderful collections. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Fantastic, Rebecca. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't see any questions in our chat. Comment. I don't see any questions. Does anyone have any questions for Rebecca about her project or about her lecture? Please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask a question directly.
I never heard such a shy audience before.
No, I'm just trying to.
I have a question. Will there be a book or anything? Or is there a place that we can go to see these? Sorry, it's not really much of a question, but I'm just so struck by these, and it's completely new to me. So,
You mean the famous women dinner service?
and basically any of the things that you showed today. I mean,
Okay.
This is 20th century is kind of not my thing, but
Well, it should be from now.
well, I find it very interesting. Yes.
Is planning to publish in their upcoming proceedings, and depending on how many images I can put into this publication, I'm hoping to share as many as possible with you.
I'd like to add to that, if I may, Joseph, we are planning to take all of these 6 lectures in this spring lecture series and combine them into one of our usual proceedings books. We do that for our in-person seminars every year since 1956, and that's what we're planning to do again with the Zoom lectures. As a membership perk, if you will, proceedings are given to each member who is a member in good standing. In addition, I think there may be, or we may be able to come up with a mechanism to eventually sell them individually to non-members. But of course, we would prefer that you would be a WIS member.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, up at the top there, Anna Anderson.
Anna.
I recognised one of the teapots that flashed past me as being a shape used by Grace Barnsley.
Oh, interesting.
So, you know, Grace had her own china decorating studio.
Yes.
I don't think she could actually, I'm pretty sure everything was bought in as blanks. But of course, she's the daughter of, hang on, which Barnsley is it? Ernest Barnsley. I always get my Sydney Barnsley. So there's Sydney Barnsley. So he has a son, Edward, and a daughter, Grace. And obviously they're part of the Cotswolds group. So I'm desperately trying to remember, because I'm out of practice. But didn't the sorry, because I go to Rodmartin so much, they prefer them to be pronounced Powell because they're Welsh. So I apologise. This is not me trying to show you up. It's just I'm used to saying Powell because I get told off if I don't when I go to Rodmartin. If you've ever been to Rodmartin, you'll know that they have those amazing Louise and Alfred Powell chargers everywhere. They're just magnificent. But didn't the Poles move to Oakridge, just outside near to Rodmartin? They have a studio there, I think. So yes. I was just wondering whether or not, sorry, this is very convoluted. You know, you were saying that the family was very close. So I was just wondering whether or not when the Poles did move to Far Oakridge, you know, did Thérèse ever visit them there and paint? They had a studio there, I should say.
I would assume so. I mean, she seemed to have been very close with her sister. I mean, I don't know is the answer, but I could also imagine that at the time when she was looking after her husband, with him being fairly senior to her, that may have been a bit more complicated, but it depends what time it really was.
Yeah, I mean, I've always imagined that that's the reason why there were so many pieces by the Poles at Rodmartin, that they are considered to be part of the Cotswold arts and crafts movement.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I must say I didn't go very, very deep into the Powells, so you probably know much more than I do on this occasion here. But yeah, if you want to send me any more, I'll happily look.
Well, I've certainly got I've got some images of some of the beautiful.
That would be wonderful if you could share.
That's at Rodmartin.
Thank you.
Does anybody know Rodmartin? It's probably our finest arts and crafts house in the Cotswolds. Ernest Barnsley is the architect.
Indeed. I wanted to ask whether the Wedgwood factory and owners ever got upset about the artworks that were portrayed on their wares. Did it bother them if they didn't like it? Were they sold as Wedgwood wares?
We do know that the wares that the Powells decorated, they were exhibited with other wares straight from the factory as well. So those seem to have passed the check. Any others, I'm wondering how much it was really within their control to really see what's happening with them, especially if they have their own small kilns to fire them. And as we hear, there are many artists who actually use these blanks. There's also one very elusive teapot decorated by Walter Sickert, which is illustrated in Maureen Batkin's book, which I have never come across in the flesh, so to say. So the Powell's work definitely, to I would say 99%, was definitely approved of by the Wedgwood factory. I can't speak of the others, and I am not sure how much real censorship they would have had there, because basically these blanks were sold off the factory and then they were gone from the factory in that sense.
Thank you. I'm involved with Salisbury Museum, where we've got a big collection of Wedgwood, and I will now go and have a good look to see what they've got in the 20th century. I'm struggling that they're reorganizing their ceramic gallery shortly, so I'm making sure that they get a good, correct selection of Wedgwood. I'm desperately trying to remember the name of the woman who collected it though, Billy somebody. Anyway, we've got a whole room of Wedgwood.
If you find anything exciting, let me know.
Yep.
May I ask a silly question? But have Patricia Cornwell, did she ever put to rest the idea that Walter Sickert was Jack the Ripper? Is it terrific? She spent millions of dollars on that. It's a real curiosity. And he was a very curmudgeonly fellow. But
yes, she wrote a book about it didn't she? And she was very convinced that he was Jack the Ripper, but I think
No,
it
nobody
doesn't
else
really-
is.
it doesn't really hold up to a lot of scrutiny. I haven't read it though, so I can only comment very.
Yeah.
She did try to go too far, didn't she? Sorry, interrupting. I think she tried to extract his
That's
DNA
what I heard.
at one point, but most British art historians think it's a load of bunkum.
She bought 30 of his paintings and was trying to scrape the top layers off to see what she could find underneath. Among other
Well, I hope she found something and it was worth it.
clues, which didn't lead anywhere, but good question.
Thank you.
Rebecca, going back to the question of selling these works, where were Thérèse Lessore's works sold? If she was buying blanks from Wedgwood, were they sold through Wedgwood or exhibitions, or how were they
That's a good
distributed?
question. I would say probably exhibitions. So she exhibited them next to her paintings in her exhibitions. So I would presume that would have been the main outlet of her Wedgwood wares. I have not come across the factory selling them. There could be some proof, some catalogue, but I haven't found anything of that yet. So I would go with the exhibitions.
So Rebecca, were her works mostly then just kind of one-offs? Yeah.
I would say so. However, I did notice that that pink, did I show the pink compote? Well, if you saw our Facebook post, there was a pink square dish with a musician in pink luster, and that very motif also appeared on a coffee pot that I've been shown recently in silver luster. So they don't seem to be from the same set, but the motif is repeated.
So the Wedgwood blanks had the Wedgwood stamp, presumably,
Yes.
even though they haven't been silver. Wow,
Yes,
fascinating.
so they would have all been stamped. In the case of earthenware, as you know, it would have been an impressed stamp, and bone china would have had the bone china stamp. So they were ready in the factory, and if they hadn't been sold to Thérèse or anybody else, they would have stayed in the factory and would have been decorated on the glaze there.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
Did Wedgwood have a market selling its blanks to artists, or was it just kind of if you were the right person who had an in, you could buy blanks, or did they readily sell blanks?
It appears to be through relationships with Frank Wedgwood and the whole net that we've just seen. I have not come across them advertising them in that sense, but again, it's just, it could be found at some point.
So
Rebecca,
interesting.
did Thérèse keep any kind of a catalog, any record of her wares?
Not that I've seen. Again, prove me wrong, I'm happy. So I haven't seen anything yet, but it's possible. She may have had just an order book or something like that as well, where she just kept track of if she had orders or a production record. I haven't seen it though.
But she didn't number her wares, so.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I have a
Is there
question.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask quickly, is there a family member still around today from that family who may have family? I know she didn't have any children, but
Yeah, so John Lessore, the painter in London, he is still active as far as I'm aware. I got in touch with his gallery, but I haven't heard anything. That was quite a while ago, so I'm not sure. Yeah, I should try again.
alrighty. Thanks, Rebecca. Lorraine?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, we collect Lessore, Emil Lessore, and we collect plaques that he painted. I'm curious, have you ever come across any tiles that any of the Lessores may have painted?
Personally, I haven't, but again, as you've seen with these wares, they could be anything and everything. I haven't seen a tile, but why not?
Okay. And do you see any other questions that we should pose? Okay, then, so it'll come back to me. Rebecca, thank you. That was absolutely fabulous. information that I certainly did not know, and I'm sure a lot of us did not know. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us today for this fourth lecture. Our next lecture in this series will be held on Friday, June 18th, the same time, 2:30 on the East Coast in the US, 7:30 in the UK. And in June, we will be hosting Katrin Jones. Katrin is the chief curator at the V&A Wedgwood Collection. And the title of her talk is Wedgwood's Networks, A British Story, Global Trade. And as you know, as we've been doing, the specific information about her lecture and the link will be emailed to members on the Sunday at the beginning of the week of that lecture. And in addition, we will put the link on our website and on our Facebook page. Please keep in mind that we keep using the same link for every lecture. So if you don't see an email or a post, you might have that link for the Zooms already. I would like to again remind everyone that while the lectures are free and open to the public, we hope that you would consider joining the WIS. And you can visit our website. As I mentioned, it's Wedgwood International Seminar.org. And you will find the link on the website for a membership form. And one last thing, and it's really hard to ask this, but I'm the one who got nominated to do this. I'm sure you understand that in order to continue these Zoom lectures, and we're hoping to have another Zoom lecture series, it involves a cost. And we would be amazingly grateful, very grateful, if any of you would consider donating to the WIS in order to help us to defray some of the cost. That's also easy. If you go to the website, there is a WIS PayPal link. So thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for everyone for participating today. And we'll see you on June 18th. So take care, stay safe. Bye now.